Welcome to Decentralized, where lifelong friends Blutoshi and Disco navigate the ever-evolving crypto landscape. With genuine curiosity and a commitment to nuance as our North Star, we offer clear-eyed exploration. Our goal? To empower listeners with the tools and insights needed to flourish in this decentralized age.
All right, what's up, everybody? Another episode of Decentralized, and this one is a very special one. Back by very popular demand, who was on our, Disco just told me, on our third or fourth show back in November when we first started doing this, is Dr. G, one of my favorite people in the crypto space, who is probably one of the only people I know who has been in AI for 10 years, back when it was called, like, what was it called? At first it was like data, like, you know, those $1 million jobs like data analysis. And then it's obviously evolved in neural networks and then into AI. And then he got into crypto from AI, which I think is probably one of the coolest things ever, because most of us have been crypto for a while and are now realizing the merging of the crypto with the AI. So Dr. G, welcome. We love having you on the show. And today we're going to cover a bunch of stuff. But before we get into that, on my left or right or over there is Disco. Welcome, Disco. How you doing today?
I'm really excited. As I say, it was almost a drinking game the amount of times we mentioned, hey, we got to talk to Dr. G. Hey, let's see if we can get him in. So I feel as if we've realized some sort of manifestation, and I'm excited for the conversation.
Yeah, 100%. So Dr. G, welcome. Do you want to share a little bit? You do have an interesting journey into the crypto space from the AI side. You want to give people just a little recap of kind of who you are, where you've been, and the cool things you've seen?
Yeah, totally. And thanks for having me, guys. It's good to be back. It feels like it was not that long ago, but sort of feels like a lifetime in terms of just like everything that's changed both within Bitcoin and within AI in the meantime. So yeah, so let's see. As Blutoshi mentioned, started out in AI. I guess back when they still called it statistics, and then data science was the hot field about as I was finishing my PhD, and then it got rebranded as machine learning, and then these days it's AI. So I spent about a decade working on building credit risk models using AI in kind of the fintech Web 2 world. Had too much time on my hands when lockdowns hit, and decided to more seriously go down the crypto rabbit hole after kind of writing it off during the quote unquote bubble of 2016, 2017. Gave it a serious look, was hooked, and said, hey, this is what I need to spend the next at least decade or two on, rather than continuing down the AI path. And so it's kind of been interesting to see the world maybe move in a different direction and discover AI, like the hype around it compared to maybe where the Bitcoin and the crypto hype were a couple years ago. But yeah, it's fun to explore the intersection of those two topics.
Yeah, Dr. G and I actually met through Ordinal Punks. I gotten into Ordinals in that first weekend and unfortunately didn't get in on the mint, but got in right after. So paid a pretty penny for it, but I do love it. And Dr. G, you got into Ordinal Punks through like a lending protocol where you were the lender and the person defaulted on your first one. And that's kind of how you slipped like backwards down the what was that game, Disco, we grew up with? Chutes and Ladders. I was gonna say
Chutes and Ladders. That's an early reference.
Yeah, I was gonna say slip and slide, but that's that outdoor thing where you'd water up and dive and then have a stick like a wedge in your rib cage.
Always a stick or like an acorn head or something.
Yeah, that's very Midwest. The acorn heads, where you could also put your fingers and then like whistle into them. So Dr. G got this Ordinal Punk, and now Dr. G, you have a couple of them, or a triumvirate of them, and you kind of fell backwards into crypto that way through Ordinals, right?
Yeah. And so the goal or the dream I have is to kind of take what we were doing in Web 2, but do that entirely on chain. Even in the Web 2 world, where I'm incredibly proud of the work we did to kind of modernize the credit system and improve the traditional credit score that's been around for 30 years and hasn't really innovated much. So very proud of that work. But even after a decade of incredibly smart, hardworking people working on the problem, like there's still many kind of legacy pieces, middlemen taking their cut and all this stuff. And so once I'd gone down the crypto rabbit hole, I said, oh, wow, there's a real opportunity here to streamline this and actually maybe deliver more on the promise of an open financial system. And so I said, okay, well, my dream then is to build. So lending as it exists today, roughly speaking, in crypto is put up, a certain amount of collateral, let's say $10,000 worth of Bitcoin. Against that, you can borrow, $5,000 worth of, stable coins or fiat or whatever. And that's great for hodlers like us who say, hey, maybe I want to access that liquidity or there are tax reasons I want to do that. But the person I'm most interested in helping, the sort of like underbanked or unbanked person, would sort of look at that and say, well, if I had $10,000 in collateral, I wouldn't need your loan. This doesn't make sense to me. So you've got this problem of, not having the primitives you need for under collateralized lending on chain, right? Identity is not a thing, and for good reason. I have serious, I guess, moral qualms with some of the KYC and AML stuff and the burden it imposes. But nonetheless, there is no sort of like stable identity or reputation system on chain. And so that creates a lot of issues for why would someone pay back a loan if you lend them more money than the collateral you had. And so the one instance I was able to find of something kind of resembling this was NFT backed lending. So you put up your NFT as collateral and you can borrow against that on one of these platforms, either in stable coins or ETH or Solana and now Bitcoin. And so I was building AI credit risk models on top of Ethereum, and then sort of stumbled into an ordinal punk that had been collateralized in a vault on Ethereum, and said, wait, how the hell do I unlock this collateral and figure out what's going on? And stumbled across the ordinal punk community and was like, wow, there's really something here in ordinals. And I've got to like pack up all this stuff and start building it on ordinals rather than on some of these NFT or other chains where NFTs are sort of more established.
Right. Well, it's a very cool way. And like I said, I just love hearing stories of how people got into crypto and kind of embraced it and coming in through the AI channels. And it sounds like the lending and loan channels it's just it's kind of an interesting way. Cause I mean, Disco can attest, a lot of people come in cause they feel like their neighbor's making more money than them. I mean, it's the FOMO factor, right? It's like, wait, what's this crypto thing? And then the most people get washed out, especially in the early days. And then the few like us, like Disco, who are like, wait, there's something interesting here. Let's stick around and learn about it. So, well, cool. Welcome. Thanks for sharing your backstory for sure. So where do we want to start? Like, the centralized side of AI, like, the show's called Decentralized. Obviously we're kind of crypto heavy focused, but I feel like the merger of AI and crypto is such an important one to touch base on. And the same kind of centralization, decentralization themes are kind of pervasive there. And both are kind of, let's be honest, the future of kind of the evolution of humankind, both in work, both in kind of saving money, preserving money, using capital, using seamless capital, like you said, for loans, like, to have PayPal is your like back end rails for stuff that's more AI and more seamless and frictionless. It's just that the fiat currency doesn't work, right? So should we go centralized first, Disco? I'd love to kind of go through who the players are right now and then work our way from centralization to kind of decentralization and freedom for us all.
Yeah, I think that's a good framework if we look at it. Kind of where the kind of those existing kind of centralized players kind of stack up right now, because when we did it last time, it was pretty much OpenAI and Microsoft were kind of out of the gate early, and people were wondering if Google was kind of stumbling. Nobody knew what Apple would maybe be getting into and all that. So if we kind of look at it from the lens of OpenAI, Microsoft, Google, XAI, Anthropic, and Apple, and then kind of get kind of your take on who's kind of in good position at this point. If anyone was drafting earlier, that looks like they're well set up now to kind of make up some gains. I think that'd be really helpful.
Yeah, because in the beginning, OpenAI, I mean, back in November with 3.5, that was really 3, but 3.5 was when everyone was like, holy shit. And everyone threw their $20 at them. They're a multi-$100 billion company almost overnight with that. Obviously, they've been working on it for years, but OpenAI on the centralized side, like the race is tighter now, right?
Yeah. And so I think where we stand today, OpenAI is still out in front in terms of best business, perhaps depending on how exactly you define that. But they've certainly got the best distribution. I mean, for the average listener or the average person who's not deep in this space, like ChatGPT is probably just what they think of when they think of this AI stuff.
Right.
And so they've certainly got a head start there. It's kind of funny. I think the last episode we did was like a week, maybe 2 weeks right before all the drama went down, where like they tried to kick out the CEO, the board tried to kick out the CEO.
That's right. Yeah.
The employees rose up and revolted, and then it ended up being the board that got fired. So there was a lot of drama that came right after the last time we talked that I think has since settled somewhat.
Because of this show, the drama really fired up. Like, this is on people's minds right now.
Yeah. Yes, it was incited by this combo.
We lit the fire. So yeah, I forgot about that. So there was all this controversy, like family members were blaming him of being a horrible person. The employees backed him. Like that was just a full coup. And Disco, you had mentioned Microsoft, but really OpenAI and Microsoft to me, which Microsoft is Copilot, those to me are almost one and the same, because Microsoft owns 49% of OpenAI. So to me, the backbone of both is OpenAI, right? ChatGPT.
Yep. Yeah. And that came up too in the drama, where at one point it looked like Microsoft was just going to grab all the sort of employees from OpenAI, like if they were kicked out. And so they're very closely tied at the hip, which I think is maybe part of what makes this Apple news interesting, in terms of Apple and Microsoft being pretty intense competitors in a number of ways. And so sort of full disclosure on my biases, I had one of the first generation iPods that broke 2 days after the warranty expired back in let's call it 2005, and swore off Apple products ever since. And so irrationally have not bought anything Apple since then, except a corporate laptop that I was the last person in a 1,000-person company to upgrade from a Linux machine. So I'm no fan of Apple, the company. I do appreciate their commitment to privacy that we've seen over the last decade or so. And so in spite of those biases, I think some of the work they're doing with running these AI models on the edge, it's often called, so sort of like on the device itself rather than back on some centralized server. I've not gone deep enough into the technical details of exactly how they're preserving privacy, but at least appreciate that it seems like they're taking this seriously and kind of pushing the industry towards that model. And so I think the Apple Intelligence is an exciting development, even if I'm like not a huge Apple fan and unsure about some of the technical details. I think this this push is a healthy one, whether it's Apple that actually does it or someone else.
Do you think the privacy is more smoke and mirrors, or no? A lot of it does not. OpenAI does not get to see who's doing what.
Yeah, I think that it is a mix of both. Like, I think this is an upgrade in privacy, but I can't imagine that it is truly private. Like I would still not be comfortable sharing certain types of data, even in spite of these promises. So something like a step in the right direction, maybe multiple steps in the right
Right.
direction, but not a solution.
Because Apple
And we,
is open, and then you're up, Disco. But
yeah.
Apple, just to let everyone in the audience know, Apple is using OpenAI as its backend, correct? Yeah. Okay.
And the initial response, or one of the initial responses, was from our friend Elon, who was pretty emphatic, right after the announcement, saying things along the lines of not allowing any employees to bring their phones if they go through with this, into any of his companies and things like that. But I think that got kind of tempered a little bit, as kind of the news settled and people kind of leaned into the statement and looked into it. But I know Elon's knee jerk was, oh, no one can ever come near my, stay away from my stuff, stay away from everything with what's going on there. So that was an interesting rollout for sure.
Yeah, and I don't even worry so much. I think it could be true that both OpenAI and Apple are truly committed to privacy and are doing their best and are authentic in this. And nonetheless, that these models, if you've ever seen, sort of like hacker types jailbreak these things and get around all the safeguards and the privacy things, I don't know that these are well understood and sort of like have the guardrails to give 100% confidence, even in spite of the best efforts there. And so I think Elon, like, I maybe don't share the same level of panic as Elon, but I think there's something real there that is like, you can't promise this is secure in the same way you could with like, encryption or something more deterministic as a process, I guess.
So out of the kind of, we talked, I guess we'll call them the more established players, or, kind of the older gen that's more centralized. Out of those, who do you think's kind of made the most gains? I know that XAI, I think that they're doing a deal with Dell and Supermicro to kind of build up what they need over there. I know that, obviously we've talked about OpenAI being lined up with Microsoft. Google, I know it kind of stumbled a little bit, but it almost felt like they weren't that worried about it because they're in the end sitting on so much data to be able to kind of go through.
They've got to be worried, Disco. They've got to be worried. They've more than stumbled. I mean, no, I mean, I don't know, Dr. G. What do you think? Like, let's hit them one by one. I don't even know what XAI is, but Google was Bard, I believe, and now it's called Gemini. So they've already rebranded it. I know the big joke was like, hey, if you want to eat closer to Earth and have a more natural diet, eat little teeny pebbles, And then the other joke was the pizza with like, hey, if you want pizza that's very tactile and the cheese doesn't slip off, just make sure you put a little non-toxic Elmer's glue. Like, what the hell? So clearly they rushed out solutions for search, right? That was not ready. They got caught flat-footed by OpenAI, but they have troves of data that other companies, I assume, don't have, unless these other companies, like the internet, can be scraped regardless. So maybe they don't have an advantage. I know, Dr. G, I'd love your take on Google and how they've handled this so far.
Yeah. I think a couple interesting points there. I think Google has handled this as poorly as a company possibly could. I mean, it's just been both real disaster and PR disaster after another. And I'm skeptical that they will ever get this right until it becomes existential. Like, I think there is a level of panic within the company, as far as I can tell from the outside. There was this interesting article on Pirate Wire's. Mike Solana talked to the guy who invented Gmail, talking about why it would be so hard to build something as disruptive as Gmail today at Google, because you've got all these gatekeepers. And I think the same is true in AI. And I think until it becomes existential for them, they just like it can't get built at such a large company with so many layers and bureaucracy and internal stakeholders. I think the Microsoft model is actually quite interesting, where you kind of outsource it to OpenAI. So if something goes wrong, it's those, it's that startup over there doing the AI stuff. It wasn't us. And so I think to really get it built, like Google needs a similar, either a backbone or a similar model of like plausible deniability of some like kind of third party building it that they're using, so that when everything hits the fan, it doesn't fall on them.
Oh.
Um, on the data advantage piece, I actually think so. Like, yeah, X.AI I think is not in the conversation for like a serious competitor to these other folks today. But I do think like the decision to make it harder to access X data or Twitter data via API actually does give them a proprietary data source that I think could make it interesting later on. And so I think you're right, Blutoshi. Like a lot of the data Google has, or maybe at least like with their current risk calculus would be willing to use in training an AI model, is stuff that can be crawled and searched on the open web. And as you see X and places like Reddit and other places start to lock down their data more, I think that data becomes more of a moat and maybe a real advantage there.
At some point, though, haven't these models, like if you all have the foundational base of just say like the entire internet or whatever, like I guess the data moat race becomes more of a like current, because I know OpenAI, I don't know what it was 2 years. I think it's a year and a half now, because they don't want to try and do current event stuff, because to me, it almost feels like they're filtering, because a lot of complaints I've heard, and I'd love for you to weigh in on, like OpenAI, in a lot of people's estimations, may have gotten better and smarter at a graduate level of analysis, but it's also become more. I mean, what's if I'm not going to use the word woke, what's the right word? It's become more centrally managed. I know there's even a word for it, where people check answers, which you should check your models, but they're also inserting human bias into it. And it's become, from what I've heard, I didn't want to say more liberal, but they're on a worse note, beyond the political bias, it's also a lot of times like, nope, not giving you that answer. Nope. Like yeah. We talked on our last show about the doctors, and like me being like, hey, what's that rash? They'll be like, oh, I'm not a doctor. I'll be like, again, I know you're not a doctor. The rash isn't big yet. Don't worry, I'm not dying. And like, you have to like beg it to try and get these answers. And a lot of people say, even though it's getting smarter, it's giving you way less and less answers. In your estimation, has OpenAI actually gone down in some ways in quality?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are a few different forces pushing this. One that I was surprised to learn, but sort of made sense to me after I heard it, and a little sad, is it's just gotten dumber as a function of what the average user wants. So like, it's like, it is often the case. Like we might be
selling out.
It's reflecting us in the mirror, not us, but us.
Yeah. The general populace, sir.
Yeah. And so that was sort of a sad realization. I mean, there are ways you can get around this by prompting it better and being like, no, trust me. Like I want you to give me the expert for this. Yeah, I can handle it. So there is a related thread to this. It got lazier at one point. Like if you ask it to write code, for a while it would generate all the code, and then it sort of evolved to just give you a description of how you could do it yourself, and you had to beg it to write code, and then it would write a snippet and the whole thing. And so I think there are real like forces of just what the average user wants, and many that may not be what the sort of like frequent or power user wants, and that's been one dimension there. And then yeah, I mean, just as OpenAI has become more and more in the spotlight, because there is a centralized entity behind it. You know, if this model is truth seeking, there are many forces that will not like the truth and try to bend that in various ways. You know, for all the usual reasons, I suppose. And so I do get the sense that like the safety checks and it'll sometimes be bundled up into this AI alignment and AI safety movement that I think is well intentioned but doing real harm.
Please
And those
protect me
forces,
from myself and my fingers typing certain questions. Please protect me. So would you say that is it, if you had to weight it where it's gotten dumber, is it because of the people and the dumbass questions and the dumb inputs, or is it more the centralized censorship, or is it kind of pretty equal on both?
yes, I think it is. Maybe most of the change I've seen is the people and the responses. I think this like very safe, cautious piece was always there. It's just becoming more obvious as people use it more and test it more and things like that. So I think even as far back as like GPT-2 or 3, it was clear that if you asked it a question about a politician on the right versus the left, like this was not, they were not using the same words or sentiment to describe them. And so I think this has maybe gotten a little worse around the edges, but I sort of think that piece was always there. And the dumber piece is just like what the user actually wants versus what they think they want, sadly.
Let me ask you this. Is the bias that is somewhat reflected that we're kind of talking about, is that simply based on the data that it's being fed? So, so it's, and are we seeing from the different, models, like they're just getting fed slightly different, kind of inputs that then lead to what it's kind of presenting?
Yeah, great question. I think it's actually a case where the cure is worse than the disease. Like I think this point you mentioned, Disco, is a real thing. Like history and all the data from history is biased and has real problems that we should seek to address. I think the AI safety and alignment people are trying to solve these problems with a sledgehammer instead of a chisel, or maybe at the wrong layer of abstraction. So I almost feel like some of these things that the bias that we see in these AI models is driven by a desire to fix very real problems in the data that's put into them, but just in a too heavy-handed, risk-averse,
Yeah.
overbearing sort of way.
So it's lacking the nuance really that's necessary to have a, kind of accurate read on that. That's fascinating.
Exactly. And I don't mean to like those are very real problems. I only disagree with the method of solving those that has been implemented, not with the existence of the problem.
And Disco, you brought up XAI earlier. It just dawned on me did they just change Grok to XAI? And I just, again, missed the memo because everything Elon eventually turns into X. Is that what you were talking about? Okay.
Yes. That's what I was referring to. And that's, I think, more like the build out and kind of, getting all the systems and the all the support in place for it. So I think that's kind of how he's building it out as XAI now. Am I correct on that?
Yeah.
Dr. G?
Yeah, I think Grok is the model itself. Like it is the equivalent of GPT-4 or like the model. And then X.AI is the like OpenAI equivalent, like the entity, exactly as Disco said, kind of building the infrastructure. And like maybe Grok is the Twitter version, but X.AI will also do stuff with like Tesla robotics and be more of a horizontal layer, even if Grok is the first application that they serve.
It will be interesting in X because X, one could argue, is the best for, I mean, you'd have to discern a lot of the BS and a lot of the hype and stuff, but it's the most real-time stream of consciousness certainly in the crypto side, I would say X is one with crypto people. The biggest, I'd say, thought leaders are there. And I would say reporters probably still X1, right? And with news, to me, that real time is where Grok could have an advantage. I haven't played with it in a couple months, but it just seems like, and who knows, all it takes, like for Anthropic, right? It takes all of a sudden you have one update. You're like, holy crap. They are, not only are they at where OpenAI is, some are arguing it's in some ways better. So I guess that's a good transition to Anthropic. I don't even know who's behind. I know who's behind OpenAI. Microsoft is 2% shy of being a majority holder in that, so they're obviously in bed together. Who owns Anthropic, and what? Tell us about Claude, and is it better? And is it for people? Is it worth trying them all right now?
Yes, yeah. So the Anthropic folks are, I believe, former former OpenAI people who left to kind of start their own company.
Got it.
Pretty sure one of the board members who left and was in the controversy recently just joined them as well. Or sorry, no, the head of super alignment, I think, joined. So there's a lot of overlap between the two, I guess.
Got
Is
it. So there is an
the
initial brain trust that has already started to percolate out, which I guess is good for at least competition. So OpenAI didn't just dominate, right?
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I have in the past used the Anthropic models, which are Claude. So think of Claude as the parallel to GPT,
Or Grok.
you know, or Grok, yeah. And I had always, I mean, Anthropic bills itself as at least even more focused on safety and alignment than OpenAI. And so my
Hmm.
past experience, if you'd asked me 2 weeks ago, I would say I use those models only enough to stay on top of them, but like
Right.
this is the opposite direction I would like to be moving in. Not a positive thing. Um, so they released Claude 3.5 last week, I think, and yeah, the both the sentiment on X and just my results of playing around with it have been quite impressive, both in terms of like how good is the model itself. Like when I ask it a question, what gets generated. I'm mostly using it for software engineering type tasks, and I think it's better at that, and that seems consistent with what other people have said. They also integrate in some functionality called artifacts, and so it makes it a little easier when you generate code to see that code, especially if it's multiple files working together, and play with it in a preview in a browser. So there's sort of like two upgrades there. One is like a better underlying model, at least for non-controversial software tasks, and then the UX of like, how do I play with this and make sure the software works the way I want, give feedback and stuff. Like how tight is that feedback loop? I think they've made a real leap there, and I've so far replaced GPT-4 as my default model with Claude 3.5 for
Ooh.
these technical tasks.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like, again, it's all the same people who started it. But again, the more varied in competition, the better. So
I have a
go ahead, Disco.
I got a question just because it's like a bigger thing that keeps coming into my head, but you keep mentioning, and overall you keep hearing about safety and alignment and all that. And as we see, we kind of are crypto centric from kind of our lens, right? And we see the regulation that was kind of being almost begged for years from the industry, and you see kind of a maturation of the lobbying forces from that side infiltrating kind of policy and things like that. At this point, aside from having some meetings with the heads of the companies in DC every so often, is there any concerted effort that you're seeing from a regulation standpoint, or is it more just left up to the entities to incorporate safety and alignment as they see fit?
Yeah. I think this is
Good
probably
question.
the area where AI needs to learn the most from crypto, and sort of seeing both I mean, the attacks sound the same, like energy usage and things like that.
Yeah.
So it's the same flavor of political attacks against the industry, and then kind of there's often fighting between chains and founders and all that stuff, like within the community. But then you even see like people stepping up for Ripple, for example, where it's like, yeah, maybe I don't support Ripple as a chain or technology, but when it's like, they're fighting against the SEC, it's like, yeah, of course we're on their side. And so I think there's a little bit of like banding together for the fights that matter within the crypto industry. Maybe in some ways that's easier because there are sort of like limited set of very powerful entities that people can rally around, the Genslers and the Warrens of the world. And I think the attacks on AI are early and like more dispersed. They pop up. California's got this bill that threatens to kind of like strangle innovation in AI in California that is like still being worked through, but as I loosely follow, it seems to be moving backwards rather than forwards. And you've sort of, I think, got this naivete similar to what we maybe had early in crypto of, hey, we're just going to build cool stuff. This is valuable. Surely they'll leave us alone and let us like build this cool stuff. And I think maybe you've got the builders and the sort of like most focused, knowledgeable people just focused on building and saying like, stay out of my way, like leave me alone, let me build this. And then you've got like this other class of forces, some combination of incumbents, the sort of like heads of the centralized entities saying, hey, regulate us. Like maybe it is not inaccurate to when I see parallels drawn between Sam Bankman-Fried and Sam Altman in terms of like the guy going to Congress and asking for regulation. And then
close the door right behind me, not in front of me.
Exactly. Yeah. I think, I'm not sure how far those parallels go, but there are a number of interesting parallels, both on the approach to regulation and some of the promises about, saving the world and things like that. And then you've got the maybe like less informed, knowledgeable folks in terms of the actual like building models that are out pushing the safety and alignment stuff. And those to oversimplify a bit, they tend to be better statesmen and stateswomen than the builders. And so perhaps the amount that they're able to influence policy and decisions and things like that is disproportionate to their actual knowledge of the process. And so I think what you need is either the actual most knowledgeable people to take politics and regulation seriously and these threats, or for them to kind of do what crypto has done and have the coin centers of the world, the fair shake packs, and say, okay, maybe this is not us, but let's take some of this like, gold from the gold mine that we currently have and just plow this towards protecting ourselves. And sadly, I haven't seen that as much in AI yet.
You know what, though? I will say this, that crypto, until recently, in the last year plus or minus, the lobbying, like it was there and Coin Center was doing a great job behind the scenes, but it didn't get really good and powerful and empower all of us in the community until I feel like the executive office right now with Biden and all them, and then Gensler, obviously, and really the Fed and this choke point 2.0, it was almost like they felt, and I think you said it before, Dr. G, the existential threat. And they were like, oh, hell no. And obviously the big mega whales like A16Z and, some of the big money guys and hedge fund guys, and now Larry Fink's getting involved, like, until it was existential. Now I feel like it got, all of a sudden, all the pieces fell into place and it got organized. And AI, builders want to build and they just aren't at that same stage yet. So before we go to decentralized, Disco, do you have anything you want to go kind of on the centralized? Because I want to finish with politics, because I think that's such an important bent on this whole thing. It affected obviously our last election, if not our last two, with certainly manipulating socials and stuff and AI. So do you want to go anywhere centralized before we kind of go to half centralized then to decentralized?
Yeah, no, I think it's time to eat the next course.
Yeah. Okay. So Dr. G, as far as like, let's go more decentralized. Obviously, that's the name of the show, but it's also the ethos of crypto. You taught us a ton in the last show, and everybody, if you didn't hear it, go back to like our third or fourth show back in November. It's a great overview, and I think it still stands the test of time of like really going into detail for like a good hour plus on just all of these, and how they're kind of positioned on the centralized versus decentralized. So as far as going decentralized, like just like crypto, not your keys, not your crypto. I know you taught us with, I believe it was like Llama, and you've got Facebook, who is surprisingly, dare I say, like a white knight in this space, like doing the open source stuff. So give us an overview. Maybe start with Facebook and the open source project that they're supporting, kind of where it's come and where we are now.
Yeah. And so this is probably the Facebook or Meta kind of model is the most mainstream of the somewhat open source models, and what that means is that they've provided the weights. So behind all this like fancy interface and powerful text that gets generated, you can boil these numbers down to you can boil these models down to just a big set of numbers that you can store on a hard drive somewhere. Um, that maybe has interesting implications for like national security and things like that might be worth touching on if we have
Right.
time. But the innovation that Facebook had was to make these weights available to essentially anyone who wants them. Now there's like an unclear, tangled backstory of whether that was intentional or accidental, but nonetheless, those weights to the model are available to anyone who wants to build on top of them.
And
So what this
Facebook's is called, just so everyone knows, Facebook's is called Llama.
Llama, yep.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
Yeah, Llama is the main one. They have a vision model called Lava
Okay.
as well, but yeah, Llama's the one that is probably most similar to things you've interacted with in terms of like GPT-4 and things like that.
Right. And before you go on, why is the weighting? So it's basically of the data that gets fed in, and I know there's all sorts of fancy names for this stuff, but the data gets fed in to provide these models. One of the most important things is to provide this weighting of what to give more credence to others. And you're saying, even though it's open source and anyone can use it, behind the curtain, Meta does have these weighting controls that could be sinister or not, or is that overthinking?
Yeah, no, that's correct. So you've essentially when you are training one of these large language models, you are basically, to oversimplify slightly, just trying to build a word prediction model. And so if I type in the cat, uh, you want to predict maybe jumped or ate or whatever. And so what's happening is, given the start of a sentence or a paragraph or whatever, you want to you want the model to pull all that in and tell you what is most likely to be the next word or set of words. Those are stored as a bunch of numbers called weights. And in contrast to the more centralized players, Meta has provided those weights to people. Now, the process to get to those weights is not fully open source or transparent. And exactly to your point, Blutoshi comes with some, quote unquote guardrails that are, as always, promised for your safety and things like that. But your definition of safety may differ from Meta's and all the usual stuff. And so why this is powerful and a step in the right direction from the more centralized players is that you can then build on top of those weights and sort of like almost pick up the model training process from where they left it, feed in your own data, and continue training the model for much less money than it would cost, the billions it would cost to train one of these models from scratch. So they've sort of given you an imperfect tool on which you can build on and customize to your needs, and that's this is known as fine tuning the model, and is incredibly useful when you have a very specific task you want the model to do, and want to help steer it closer to that specific task rather than this general purpose tool.
At this point, are we seeing like significant signs or movement towards usage of the open source options, or is it pretty much like that's getting built and it's still dominated by, the centralized players? Like, is there hope right now for people to get off the centralized and move over to some of these other options?
Yeah, great question. I think Llama is incredibly popular within the developer community. And so, either because of this customization you can do, or because of the fact that you can actually like download these weights, run them on your own hardware. So it's expensive to run these models, but much, much more expensive to train themselves. And so you can, instead of paying the cost per API call, or the $20 a month equivalent, you can actually run these yourself, perhaps for cheaper. So the developer community likes Llama and is building on top of it. Now, for the end user, I think there are some like exciting green shoots. Sort of like a familiar name to many on this podcast, I guess, is Eric Voorhees for his.
I was just going to
sort of,
ask that. Yeah, with Venice.
yeah, and so I think like I use it occasionally. I don't know that like the average person outside of crypto or who isn't already familiar with Eric and his commitment to decentralization is using this, but over time I expect / hope this to grow.
Yeah.
As of last, I just heard an interview with him on Peter McCormack. It was a great interview, and I got Venice, and it's like $45 a year. He said he had like 2,000 or 3,000 people. So yeah, not huge, probably a smaller scale. But I was just going to ask you because I've got Venice.ai open. I've been playing around with that. It seems, maybe I'm not asking it the most difficult questions. Maybe I'm part of the dumbed down America, just asking about rashes on elbows. But so now Hermes 2 Theta and Doge or Doggy 70B, those are all different builds of Llama 3, right?
Yes, I believe so.
So is there any, so would you call that partially centralized Llama then? It sounds like there's a great builder community on top of it. Like if you're looking at like Linux or, crypto holding your keys and stuff, where would you put this with those, I assume, further on the decentralized holding your own key scale? Where would, I guess, quantify how important those weights are as for decentralization? I felt good getting Venice, or am I just kind of tricking myself because Facebook's still behind the curtain like, hey, like we'll tone down this and we'll raise this, and they can still make it like make you have a political bent in one way and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think Venice has done a nice job of undoing any of that modification, such that like using a Venice is like something on the order of 90 or 95% of the way there, in terms of like, getting everything there. If you want the full-fledged 100% decentralization, it's actually a very, very interesting group out of France called Mistral. And so they are the sort of like fully no guardrail if you want it type model, or I think actually we'll make this very modular so you can swap in your own guardrails. Like guardrails are important and useful for many commercial purposes. So like, but you should get to choose them as the user, not necessarily us as the general purpose provider. And so depending on how far down that sort of like decentralization and purity perspective you want to go, I think Mistral is the best, but like what Venice has done is both impressive and valuable, and probably is like the close enough for the end user who doesn't want to fiddle with all the technical stuff.
So you're saying
Yeah, and
for
it's actually,
Blutoshi and Disco, basically, like we want to go decentralized, but we're willing to sacrifice that 5 to 7% to just be like, here's my $45, like give me some answers.
Let's get it done. Yes.
Because
yeah,
Venice had
yeah,
great, like, again, like, I don't know. I'm not asking it to solve super complex coding and stuff, but in the questions I asked it, it seemed, I didn't do in-depth analysis, but Venice seemed like it was pretty good. So it was exciting for me because, and now I'm hearing how open source it is, at least it's most of the way there. Like, thank goodness, at least, 8 months later, 7 months later, since our last meeting and show, that there's a lot of players and you can kind of pick where you want to be on that centralized, decentralized spectrum. And I suspect guys like you who are good coders and who are using, you're in the AI field, you're obviously staying on top of all of them because, you love it and you have to, and you want to, but it sounds like you use different ones for different purposes too.
yeah, yeah. Very, very much so. I think, yeah, and it's sort of an art in terms of like knowing which one is best for which purpose.
Yeah.
And that it's sort of like a moving target as well, right? Like I had written off Claude 3 weeks ago, and then suddenly it's my default. And so
3 weeks ago, he didn't say 3 months or years. He's like, that's how fast this space moves. It's insane.
Yeah, yeah, it truly is. But yeah, I really like Venice for historical questions, especially on like things that the centralized players find very controversial. Like when I ask about income taxes or why certain decisions were made certain ways with the founders and things like that, and find it to give a lot more clear-eyed answers of like how would someone in the 1910s think about the level of income taxation, things like that.
So did they undo what Meta tried to do with the weightings, or no, they're just the weightings aren't as important as, like, how did they free it up to be as decentralized as you say it did with Meta controlling the weightings in the background? I guess that's what I'm trying to wrestle with here.
Yes. Yeah. So you can think of what they're doing or what anyone is doing when they fine tune a model as continuing the process that a Meta would have started. And so you can almost think of it as like the weights Meta provides, have had billions of dollars in computation spent getting to those specific weights with the guardrails and things in there. And then so you can spend computational power changing those weights based on new data you feed it, and depending on how much effort went into like sort of dumbing down or making safe the original weights, that's how hard it would be to fix that.
Got it. So they are actually adding on top of, so the foundational model is Meta, and Venice is actually taking it to another level with their own weighting to make it, on top of this foundation, their own and way more open to giving honest historical answers about why we have taxes or whatever your question is.
Yes. Yeah.
Ooh, I like that. Sorry, Disco. I know you were going to ask a question, but I wanted to make sure I drilled as far down as I could there.
I like the drilling. I'm gonna bring it out with kind of a basic question. But when you're talking about this, should we expect to see like hyper focused models? So like a sports stat. It's like, okay, well, this one just crushes it on any sort of sports stats or investment. And it's kind of like hyper specialized models. Is that something that's coming, you think, or is it just going to be kind of part of the broader LLM?
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting question and one that's debated within the community today. And it is essentially, will we have one model to rule them all? This is often what people mean when they talk about AGI, or artificial general intelligence. So this one tool that can do anything you ask it really well. This timelines on this and whether it's possible are heavily debated. I think until we get that, having specialized tools is really the way to have an edge. So what my current prediction, I'm still unsure about like whether we'll get AGI. I think it's probably a ways away, yeah, plus or minus 5 to 10 years. So maybe not that long, but longer than people might sense. And in the meantime, building these very narrow specialized tool, as with most things, if you've got a specialized tool versus a general tool, you can make it better. And I think what will be exciting is as the ability to build these very narrow specialized tool, as that infrastructure builds, like that is something I could do today, but opening it up so that the end user can do this, I think is really an unlock when you've got the sort of business person or the person closest to the problem who's able to like click a few buttons and build upload their data and build the tool specific to them. I think we're like close to that, but it's clunky. And so, yeah, I think we'll see a lot of specialized tools. Now, there are all sorts of questions on like, will we know these exist, or will people build specialized tools and keep them in-house for their business advantage and things like that? But I think there's a lot of bang for the buck there in terms of specialized tools.
So from a general perspective, it's kind of you could make the link to, kind of the development of the various blockchains as well, right? Like, is this going to be used for this primarily? Is there going to be, one that kind of, rises up and takes over and all that stuff? So somewhat similar in the build out, and we'll see how it kind of plays out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another open question that will affect this is, I think as mentioned earlier, like, the entire open web has kind of been scraped by all these models and all that data is in there. And so there's a real open question of like, does the next leap come from just better compute, like being smarter with the models? Does it come from some new data source, whether it's proprietary, maybe whether it's like as the generative AI stuff, like generating videos and images, as that gets more accurate, I mean, you could imagine a world where you generate a video, use the video as training data for your new model because it's such an accurate representation of the world. And so there's a debate on whether synthetic data will take us to the next level or not. That I think is kind of mind blowing to wrap.
Sorry, what does synthetic data mean?
Synthetic data is essentially like data that has been generated by AI and then used to train another AI.
Oh, so it's like layer 2 AI or layer 3 or whatever. It's now you're into meme coin AI. I guess I don't know if that's a good analogy, but
we always got to bring it back.
Yeah. Well, I guess my metaphors all go back to crypto, but you're saying obviously that could be really good with a foundation of the models we already have, and it could also get very dangerous from a derivative standpoint where AI is almost taking us to this different place that's non-reality, because all I'm hearing right now, like we all know after COVID, like the kind of like how media has I mean, I guess it's a good time probably, Disco, right, to go towards the elections and towards the politics and the AI bias. Like right now we know, obviously we're kids of the 70s and early 80s with our cartoons like the Laugh Olympics and the Giggle Snort Hotel and other strange drug-induced wonderlands. But we know now like how the message of media, which first it was just 3 broadcast channels, then it went to cable in the 80s and 90s and 2000s. And now the name of the game to kind of like, I don't want to say control the thought of the masses, but to heavily mold or shape it is really, the more I hear Dr. G, is AI. Which model, like already after this conversation, I could say without a doubt, I'm glad that I canceled my OpenAI subscription, and I'm really going to dive deeper into Venice to get more accurate historical answers. But if I'm in this minority of people who's kind of like, not your keys, not your crypto, freedom to transact, freedom of privacy, we might be like literally the Star Wars Rebel Alliance, like this tiny ragtag group of folks. But it's true with these, with Anthropic, with Sam Altman. I don't know if I want to put the fate of my family and of humankind in the hands of some of these big names. I guess, Dr. G, that was more of a monologue than a question, but the question is, you can see it happening. The AI bias and the models. There is probably a battle for control of thought with these models. This is the next frontier, or it's the current frontier, and only we're aware of it because we're on the front lines of it.
Yeah, and I think the one important and scary distinction between the like battle for decentralized money and the battle for decentralized AI is actually comes down to these weights. The fact that with a fancy USB stick, you could pick up those weights. Sort of a nation state could yank those weights from one of these closed source companies or open source. But I think the experience of the last couple of decades has shown like open source software tends to be more secure rather than less.
And
And
resilient.
so yeah, I think there is a very real threat of like what happens if a foreign adversary steals one of these models that like if they steal steal the idea for Bitcoin, it's like great that will be good for the
Right.
world. um, and there's been a lot of talk recently about this, and so I think like the companies are starting to take that seriously. But as with most external threats, I think the reaction to that from the powers that be could be the real scary thing, in the name of
Absolutely.
safety.
Why is the theft? I mean, you almost have to assume now. I mean, my social security number and that of my family, including my kids, has been stolen. Mine multiple times, my wife multiple times, from all the companies I used to work for. Like, my point is, everything that can be stolen, like, it can and will be. I mean, we know that when we did the atomic bomb, Russia got it because there was a plant, in the whole Oppenheimer book and movie. So you have to assume that it's going to get stolen. But why do we, if we have the Venice model or even OpenAI, who cares if it gets stolen by North Korea? What can they do with that? Because they still need, quote unquote, the influencers and the reach to be able to push that model towards you. Or you're saying they brainwash their own people to do whatever they want?
Yeah. I think the threat is maybe the next once if and when we get the next leap or two, that those models are not widely available to the average person, and so that they're sort of like locked down and then stolen by some other entity that will use them for nefarious purposes if they've got a lot more, sort of their own surveillance data and things like that. So it's something like the closed source models that are at the cutting edge being stolen and then used for nefarious purposes is a real threat. And then the reaction to that threat is, I think, something that will become increasingly concerning. Like that could be the sort of like
Choke point.
justification used to like shut down all open source and things like that. That
But
could be
if,
the Patriot Act
oh,
equivalent.
Yeah,
so
so that
could,
could be like the choke point
jeez.
on AI, right? Because you're going to have the same framework that you have with, illicit funding and, all that. And you've seen the people jump out whenever there's an event like, oh, we got to make sure we understand where crypto is going because of, it's funding these folks. Like that's kind of the, kind of humorous narrative
Okay.
through DC to kind of lead to, hey, we need to get a handle on this or else, right? So it's that or else, kind of motivation for
Okay.
overcorrection, right?
So it's not that the bad actors get it, it's the reaction, just like 9/11. It's our reaction, with the Patriot Act, it's our reaction and over clamping down of the US government or G7 or whoever to limit the freedoms of the people. I mean, could you, if you have, how would you even ban like certain models? Like, I guess anything can be done, but if we have enough people who believe in it, and maybe that's the fight, could you crack down on that? Because can't I run Mistral on my own machine? You're like, dude, they've got eyes everywhere.
Yeah, and that's exactly what California is trying to do. And some of the Biden executive order is they have defined it at the like was it the exaflop? Essentially, how much
Oh yeah.
computational power is your model using? If it's above this, like, oh, it's the equivalent of Gensler saying, well, you just come in and talk to us, it'll be fine. And we know how that turns out. And so, yeah, the current implementation is trying to stop it at the computational level of training, which ignores the fact that computers get more powerful and all sorts of issues with using that as the actual metric on which you're judging which is okay for you to mess with and not. But yeah.
And that can almost be in the guise of misinformation or disinformation, and that coming out with weaponized AI for different sides of political, of all the different parties and things like that. So that's what I'm wary of, it just getting kind of lumped into this with just a scary sauce, and then seeing just a total overcorrect and being like, great.
Yeah, and me too. I think it's like the actual threat that is being responded to is much more legitimate in my mind than like the money laundering and financial surveillance type things of choke point 2.0. So there actually is a more legitimate case on that side when comparing them, and so therefore I worry that the reaction will be like an order of magnitude more of an
So I'm sorry,
overcorrection than
you're saying it's there's more of a legitimate overreaction or perceived on the AI side, not the financial crypto side, or vice versa.
exactly like the actual issue being solved there from like nations adversarial nation state getting artificial general intelligence is a real thing to be worried about, unlike money laundering and
But is
KYC.
is it though? Like certain governments already, in however they do it. I know in some African countries they actually will install Facebook in every phone so they can like control the narrative because that's the one they figured out. So you're saying that could be used way more, but like, and I know we're trying to, spread democracy to the whole world through very strange warlike means, but I don't see, I feel like the financial thing is the one big blunt weapon they have now because everything's on world reserve currency is still fiat. So that's what they use. But that one seems like the clampdown could more easily be justified to the public. But you're saying this one, unfortunately, with the right or wrong black swan event, could easily be justified to be like, no, we need to clamp down on this and have Patriot Act 2.3, models can't be, because you made a great point in the last show, like the whether it's teraflops or exaflops in 10-15 years, that might feel like, anything over 6 megs of data, you'd be like, what? Like that's not even enough. So I'm glad we dug deeper because I'm really trying to wrestle with, like I always tell Disco, and our goal is kind of like to spread decentralization in that mindset so that, our children's children's have a freer world with which to live in. And it just seems like the surveillance and the means to do so is getting more and more and more. So I know that was a long-winded question, but it just feels to me like that one would be harder to justify. But you're saying now with the right event, it would be much easier.
Yes, yeah. I think as the models get more powerful, it would be much easier to justify, at least at the level of like, hey, here's this scary threat. Look at this surveillance things that happen. We have to lock it all down. I think this would be like as the models get more powerful. Like any other tool, as it gets more powerful, you can do more good stuff and more bad stuff. And
Of
I
course.
worry that as the more bad stuff capabilities increase, that this will be the justification used. And so I think it's like it is the reality that the best defense against the improper use of the tool is like, hey, we've got to be the best tool makers and tool users in the world, and open source is the best model that's been discovered for doing that in software. And so that's the only way we can keep up. But I think the right black swan event creates a powerful case for the, just average person or average senator to say, yeah, let's lock this stuff down.
Yeah, it just seems
Is
like. Go ahead, Disco.
Well, just really quick, how we've seen the politicalization of Bitcoin recently, and it being more centric on one side of the aisle than the other. Is it the same kind of lines from the AI side of it? Like, is one party more kind of guarding it, or are we seeing the same alignment, or is there anything on that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Sadly, I think my answer is not really. Like it's not even like a battle. It's sort of like one party, probably the party you could guess based on their stance on Bitcoin and crypto. Maybe not the entire party, but the same subset of the party is very worried about locking the models down and safety and things like that. And then the group of people who would be fighting for Bitcoin and accelerationism and the future, I just think has not woken up to this issue, and there's not that same effort. So it's like kind of a one-sided battle right now, sadly.
Yeah.
So I'd love to end kind of on a high note. We've brought it kind of full circle to where it is now politically. I mean, is the best thing to do just, obviously just like stand with crypto, the lobbying probably needs to get stronger, and hopefully there's it's a lot in hindsight. It's a lot easier for crypto to kind of get that, because think about the financial stake that the financial stake is spread out to so many of us. There's the whales, the A16Zs, who have a hand in building a lot of this stuff, and the folks like them. But there's so many of us just like regular folks who have benefited greatly from crypto. So there's a huge base or groundswell of support. Whereas AI, people, there's people all over the world who are using it. It's making their jobs certainly easier. Some people are being more creative with it or whatever, but there's not that financial incentive. And I always say to Disco, like, if there's an incentive to do something positive and there's a little bit of like financial greed in there, that you like, if the carrot's right, then, to fight the good fight, then that's good. Whereas AI, it makes me a little more nervous that people don't care about decentralization as much as we do. They just want things that work, and they might be accepting of what's told. Like how, and maybe you just said this with the open source, maybe that's literally the 2-word answer, open source, but what can we do, or what can people do to make sure, like I said, we don't have the empire collapsing down on our little Tatooine, and we can kind of keep our democracy down here and keep our freedom of thought and freedom to transact and privacy and all that good stuff.
Yeah, yeah, I think yeah, exactly as you said. Kind of playing around with the open source, caring about this, maybe being an informed consumer of these models is the first step. Like even realizing, I mean, your average GPT-4 user may not even be aware of the fact that they are not getting the uncensored truth from the model. And so I think the first step is awareness. Maybe the second step is in the same way that I think we all probably believe that like companies who embrace Bitcoin and put it on use it for their treasury, like over a long enough period of time, that will be a real advantage to them. And with that, like commercial advantage comes political advantage
Right.
and all that.
Right.
I think there's a parallel there with these AI tools. They're so new and powerful, but also scary that like I think many in the business community feel like, oh yeah, that's that interesting thing I want to learn about. It does some cool little party tricks, but I don't know that there's yet widespread. How can I adopt this in my business? And so I think always looking for a way to integrate that into one's work is another both powerful carrot of like, hey, I can be twice as efficient at what I do, and with that will come more both financial and political leverage. And then the usual like these having gotten more involved in the process this time around, these senators and representatives, it's important to remember, like they work for us as citizens, and they listen to us, even if it doesn't always feel that way when you read the headlines. But like, as cliche as it
Yeah.
sounds, like telling them this is important to you, but both like directly and through the ballot box.
I feel like they listen to us if there's enough of us. And I feel like with this groundswell in crypto, it was a cool feeling as we've been doing this show to see this shift where we were always on the defense, be like, no, we're not, no, we're not. And now we're like, listen, like I said, unabashedly, Disco and I have admitted we grew up in liberal families. We grew up in a liberal state, and I want what's the best for people and humankind, but now we're seeing kind of the other side of central planning and the decisions get made. And, maybe part of it's age, but it's terrifying. And this two-choice system we have is simply not good enough now. I mean, RFK can't even get on to debate these other guys, and whether you like him or not, like, he's got something to say. And like, we need a third, fourth, and fifth party. And I know then coalitions get more difficult, but right now it just feels like the same kind of underlying progress of surveillance, and kind of like the country is more in control than the individual people and states. I mean, thank God we have states and states' rights, because that could be our saving grace again. I don't know, but I love that. So it's awareness, getting it out there, understanding open source, but yeah, just the awareness to know what the models might be feeding you and how they might be biasing you is a first step. It's like a 12-step AA program. The first step, it's like, you got to know you got a problem, dude. And
Yep.
Not for crappy metaphors, but that's probably the best one that fits here too. So This was fascinating. Disco, do you have anything else to add to ask Dr. G? I after the first one, that was such a great show of understanding and learning kind of the players in the game. And now I feel like I have so much more knowledge on like what I believe in. And it just feeds right into the crypto, private keys, open source, and like, let's make sure people are educated as they come in. And it's a tall task, but it's one that's supremely important.
Yeah, obviously it's a multi-front battle that we're in right now. And, you watch CNBC, you hear about NVIDIA, you hear these, whatever it is, every other person's talking about how they're going to integrate AI into their growth structure, and everything like that. It just becomes background noise to a degree.
100%.
And then you start thinking about, this conversation. It's like, I'm going to look at my OpenAI subscription. I'm going to look at, Claude. I'm going to look at Venice, and, I'm going to try to, just share with as many folks as I can, just to, apply critical thinking. And I think that when you apply critical thinking across these different, kind of fields, you always kind of come back to, well, let's have it be more open source. Let's have it be decentralized, because if not, we're talking about people having a lot more control, and a lot of the centralized players are coming out of having all the power from kind of Web 2, right? So they're kind of just converting it into holding on to what they had before, and making sure that they can use their massive weight to be able to, purchase the GPUs and what they need right now to kind of continue to have that barrier. So I think that I think it's a great thought exercise, and I think we need to check in more frequently on, some of these other fronts, instead of just getting so laser focused on what we look at most day to day. So I appreciate the time, I appreciate the knowledge, and I really enjoyed the conversation. So thanks again for everything, Dr. G.
Yeah, appreciate you. Where can they find you and follow you, which is a highly recommended, Dr. G, Absolutely. Where they can learn more and stay on top of what's going on in your world?
Yeah. Twitter is probably the best place for now. We'll tease it maybe for another show, but hopefully towards the end of the summer or early fall, have something exciting to announce on this, ordinals lending front. But for now, it's just Twitter. I always mess up the handle, but it's Dr. G, DRG __123.
I recall making funny on the last show. Oh, the double underscore, the coveted double underscore before you get 1, 2, 3. I love it. So Disco, I'll do this one. So everybody, this is for entertainment purposes only, and it's not financial advice. I mean, that's really all there is to it, right, Disco?
You took the words out of my mouth.
But Dr. G, I can't thank you enough. Every show we do where I've written down a bunch of stuff where I'm going to go like, check this out, check that out, is always a good show. So thank you for your time. And we'd love having you on, and we want to have you on again, because there's a whole nother realm of like AI and kind of manipulation with socials, with politics. And I know you've been following that closely, especially in Ohio. So thank you for coming on. And until next time, we will see y'all later.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Take care.